A woman knocked on my door at midnight and said, "Marry me right now." I was sitting in my living room with a bottle of cheap scotch and the lights turned off. The silence in the house was heavy. My wife had walked out 3 hours earlier after telling me she had been in love with her business partner for years. She didn't even pack a toothbrush. She just left the keys on the counter and drove away in a car I helped pay for. I felt like a ghost in my own home. Everything I had built for a decade was gone in a single conversation. Then someone started pounding on my front door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was loud and rhythmic. I thought it was her coming back to grab her things, or maybe to tell me she made a mistake. I opened the door ready to be angry or pathetic, or both. Instead, I saw a woman I had only seen in newspaper clippings. It was Clara Vance. She was the wife of the man my wife had just run off with. She looked like she had just stepped out of a boardroom, even though it was nearly 1 in the morning. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask if she could come in. She just stood there on my porch and told me that our spouses had been funneling money out of her family textile business for 18 months. She said they had used my personal credit score and my dormant small business license to secure massive predatory loans to cover their tracks. I told her she was crazy. I told her I didn't know anything about textile manufacturing or business loans. Clara handed me a tablet. She showed me digital copies of documents with my signature on them. They looked perfect. My wife had access to everything. She knew my passwords and where I kept my social security card. They had turned me into a fall guy for a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. If the banks called in those loans tomorrow, I would be bankrupt and likely facing a fraud investigation. Clara looked me right in the eyes. She told me she owned the majority stake in the parent company, but her husband had an ironclad prenuptial agreement that protected his shares unless he was convicted of a felony. She said she needed a legal partner she could trust implicitly to help her dissolve the holding company from the inside before the authorities caught wind of the fraud. She told me that if we were married, her lawyers could use spousal privilege laws to shield certain communications, and she could restructure my debt under her corporate umbrella immediately. She said, "If you say yes, we get married tomorrow morning at the courthouse. I will save your credit and I will help you bury them. If you say no, you can wait for the police to knock next week." I didn't even think about it. I didn't care about love or the sanctity of marriage anymore. My heart was already a pile of ash on the floor. I looked at this woman who was essentially a shark in a designer suit, and I said yes. We were at the courthouse at 8 a.m. By noon, I was legally married to a billionaire, and by 2 p.m. her legal team had filed an emergency injunction against my ex and her lover. The next 6 months were a blur of depositions and forensic accounting. My ex tried to call me a dozen times. She sent me emails crying about how she was manipulated and how she never meant for me to get hurt. I never replied. I just forwarded every single message to Clara's legal team. Watching the panic set in on their social media as their assets were frozen was the only thing that made me feel alive. They thought they were the protagonists of a grand romantic tragedy. They thought they were escaping into the sunset with a bag of stolen money. They didn't realize they had left behind 2 people with absolutely nothing left to lose. When the indictments finally came down, it wasn't even a fight. They had left a trail of digital breadcrumbs that a toddler could follow. Last night, Clara and I sat in her backyard. We still live in separate houses. Our marriage is a legal contract and nothing more. But we sat there and watched the news report about the sentencing. My ex got 5 years. Her partner got 8. Clara turned to me and asked if I wanted a divorce now that it was over. I looked at the garden and the quiet night. I realized I didn't want to go back to being the guy who got played. I told her we should stay married for a while longer. She just nodded and poured me another drink. Full story on the channel, link below.